basically start writing without worrying about the possible outcome. So once you've done all this work, then sit down and just write. Don't worry about it. Write from here. Write from the heart, not from the head. As the character, Sean Connery's character in the movie Finding Forrester advises the young want-to-be writer, he said, write the first draft from your heart, the second from your head. No thinking, that comes later. You must write the first draft with your heart, you rewrite with your head. The first key to writing is to write and not to think. What they're driving at is if you overthink about it, if you over-mentalise, you get bogged down in the semantics of it and you won't actually end up getting that story out that you want to. So just write it. You're certainly going to do some editing later on. So write it out first. Just pick a place, a person or event and start writing. Doesn't matter. You don't have to start at the beginning. You can start anywhere. Most writers just pick somewhere and start, and they order things around later. They'll move this bit up to here, and that whole section where that happened, well, that might get cut out of there and put down here. In other words, they pull it together afterwards. They've got a rough schematic, which is what I said a few moments ago, but just work your way through it. Keep writing until you've exhausted that subject, and then pick another one. So just write one section and then move on. And when you've finished one section, sit back and give yourself a little applause. Because you've done an awful lot of work up until then. If your mind leaps to a particular event, start there and write. You don't have to write in a particular order. If something else springs to mind while you're writing something, make a quick note about it somewhere else to come back to, and then keep going on the section that you're working on. Often inspiration for the next section to write will come while you're writing that section. So often when you're writing something, bingo, you know what you're going to do next. The actual order doesn't matter. Write in any order. Use your structured story plan and tick off the sections. So you've got a structure that you've worked out. You worked out your themes. You worked out a base overall structure, and just tick them off as you do it. That way you can make sure that you achieve something. So you get through it. And just write until you finish your story. Just keep going. Excuse me. I'd like to talk to you about anecdote versus recount. Anecdotes can be far more powerful in telling your story than a straight recount of the facts. A recount is a straightforward retelling of an experience or an event. Something like, I went to Kincumber today to give a seminar on writing your memoirs. Okay, yeah, that's true. But you could say, when I went to Kincumber, I walked into the room and there were something 30-odd people, and Bob was there with his video camera, and everyone was busy writing down notes and scribbling, and I was wondering to myself, were they so busy scribbling that they didn't listen, or were they just, come at it from a different viewpoint? And here's something I prepared that's a little bit better thought out that will give you the idea. I'd been working at Jones Industries for 3 years and was giving more than a passing thought to moving on when I went to a typical business function that changed everything. I could hear the buzz of voices and the clinking of glasses as I walked up the stairs to the function room. And as I entered the room and shook hands with the chairman, I glimpsed a beaming smile through the crowd. A woman so beautiful that I was captivated by that one smile, so I really had to shake myself to concentrate on what the chairman was saying. This transition moves quickly from the recount of the author's first 3 years with Jones Industries. Da-de-da-de-da, I worked at Jones Industries, dum-dum-dum-dum. And the reader is sort of hooked in by the line, I went to a typical business function that changed everything. So it's sort of typical, and then something that changed anything. So, that's probably not typical. This transition moves smoothly from a recount, and it's now set up to discover the story of how the author met his wife. It's time to move on with the rest of the story, but should the writer move out of the anecdote and get on with the narrative? It might go something like this. So just after that last section where he was talking about being hard to concentrate on what the chairman was saying, the next paragraph would be, that was 12 years ago, and now Jenny has been my wife for 11 and a half years. So we've gone straight into the woman, set up meeting her, met her, now he's married. Little would we know that at that function, how much drama and intrigue those years would bring to our lives, living in 3 different countries and being forced to flee for our lives from one of them. Of course, not all memoirs will have such drama and intrigue as having to flee for your lives. The general idea remains the same though, to move smoothly in and out of the story, add vivid details, engage the reader, and give them a reason to read on. What point of view are you going to use? The first person is common if you're telling the story. I mean, I did this, I did that. And from another's perspective, the third person viewpoint is less common in a memoir, but it can be employed to ease the burden of I, because you don't want to go I if you're writing a story, because it gets very boring. And even though you're not being egotistical, it can come across that way. So changing the viewpoint to avoid being perhaps seen as self-obsessed. Now, here's an example. My mum and I waited on the platform for the train at Gosford, and the wind whipped down the gully and fair lashed me. And when the train chugged into the platform, the smuts from the smokestack made my eyes water so bad I could hardly see the step to get on. So first person, you really got a sense of being there at Gosford, wind whipping through, smuts going in the eyes. And if that was written from another's viewpoint or a third person, John and his mum waited on the platform for the train to Gosford, with the wind whipping down the gully and lashing him as he stood there. And when the train chugged into the platform, the smuts from the smokestack made his eyes water so bad he could hardly see the step to get on. Virtually the same, but not the same. In the first one, the speaker is telling the story. It's personal. You can almost feel that wind getting him, and you can almost feel the hurt as the smuts get in his eyes. The other one's more detached viewpoint. Both ways are effective, but a personal memoir from your own perspective is often a very powerful way of telling your story. You can sometimes change viewpoint perhaps with a major protagonist. So if there's 3 or 4 of you together in a particular scene, you can start off telling the story and then roll it into somebody else telling the story from their viewpoint, and then you can go back to your own first person again quite smoothly. Just so that it adds a little bit more interest, as you're imagining how somebody else might have viewed it. So that's what I'm saying here. Use a point when another character plays a big part to switch between the viewpoints. The pros and cons of changing points of view. The pro is it's a more interesting story because you're telling a story and you're also getting another person telling the story from their viewpoint. The con, it can be confusing to the reader if you try and do it too often. And also it's not a typical way to write a memoir, but it is an interesting